Okay, so picture this. You're standing in a climate-controlled vault at the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. It's quiet, that specific kind of dry, archival cool. And you're just staring at a shelf. And it's packed with these ancient clay tablets. Now, for most people, this is, it's pretty dry stuff. We're talking thousands of receipts for grain, livestock counts.
It's the ancient equivalent of a filing cabinet filled with tax returns.
Exactly. But then you reach out and you pick up one specific tablet. It's small, kind of reddish-brown, catalog number CBS 10673.
Yeah.
And honestly, it looks like a lump of dried mud. So, why are we starting here?
Because visually, it's incredibly boring. I mean, it looks like a receipt for goats, but if you can read the cuneiform, you realize this isn't a receipt. It's a shipping manifest.
A shipping manifest. Okay, so like a packing list?
A packing list with a real sense of panic. The text describes items being moved from a temple in Nippur with, and this is the quote, deliberate haste.
Deliberate haste.
They're stripping the fixtures, packing up the archives. They are, for all intents and purposes, liquidating the office.
But this is where it gets really weird. The scribe who wrote this, he used a very specific Sumerian word, ki. Now, usually in an administrative context, ki just means to depart or to send away.
Right, like shipping a crate of wool to the next city over simple logistics.
But on this one tablet, the scribe did something. Well, something unprecedented. He attached a determinative marker to that word, ki.
And for anyone who isn't, fluent in dead languages, a determinative marker is basically a classifier.
It tells you what kind of thing you're talking about.
Exactly. And this specific marker, it's reserved exclusively for defined subjects, for gods. So grammatically, this doesn't say, we are shipping some statues. It reads, the gods are evacuating.
That gives me chills every single time. And that is exactly the vibe of today's deep dive. We're looking at these ancient Sumerian texts not as mythology, but as a technical archive. An archive of institutional failure. We're looking at the paperwork of a shutdown.
It's a really compelling framework. We tend to view the Anunnaki, the Sumerian gods, as these all-powerful, capricious beings who just did things on a whim.
Right.
But the source material, if you read it literally, as administrative data, it tells a totally different story. It suggests there were high-level administrators evacuating a system that was collapsing around them.
And we're calling this the guiding philosophy. Decompose and distill. We want to figure out how they managed that transition from crisis management to just total withdrawal. Because the evidence suggests it wasn't clean. It was a process.
A messy, bureaucratic, and probably desperate process.
So let's start with the timeline. If we're saying this was a long-term failure, we have to talk about the Sumerian King List, specifically the Weld-Blundell prism.
Yes, at the Ashmolean Museum, this is a vital piece of the puzzle. It lists the kings who reigned before the Great Flood. And honestly, this is where most historians just throw up their hands and say, well, it's myth, because the numbers are, frankly, they're ridiculous.
Ridiculous is an understatement. I'm looking at the data. The antediluvian, so pre-flood section lists only 8 kings. 8. But it says they reigned for a combined total of 241,200 years.
Right. You have kings like Ululim, who supposedly ruled for 28,800 years, and Menluana for 43,200 years.
So yeah, the usual take on this is, okay, aliens, or magic, or just Sumerians didn't understand time, because that's biologically impossible.
But it is. It's completely impossible if you think of them as biological lifespans. But let's apply our philosophy. Let's decompose and distill the data. What if we stop thinking of these as individual lives and start seeing them as administrative cycles?
Okay, walk me through that.
It comes down to the math. We use a base 10 system.
Right.
The Sumerians used base 60, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute, 360 degrees in a circle,
Right.
And in their system, the key unit for a complete cycle was called a sar.
And a sar is what?
Numerically, it's 3,600, but philosophically, a sar was like a universe or a totality. Think of it less like a year and more like a term.
Oh, like a presidential term.
That is a perfect analogy. If I tell you a president served 2 terms, you immediately know that's 8 years. You don't assume the person is only 8 years old. A term is a unit of governance.
Okay, I think I see where you're going. So when the list says 28,800.
That number is exactly 8 sars. Every single one of those impossible numbers in the pre-flood list is a perfect multiple of 3,600. So the text might not be saying Ululim lived for 28,000 years. It's saying the Ululim administration managed the crisis for 8 full operational cycles.
That changes the entire vibe. It goes from immortal king to endless bureaucracy.
Exactly. And get this, look at the names themselves. They tell a story of decline. The first king is Ululim. That translates roughly to the finisher, he who set up the system. But then you get the second king, Alaugar.
And what does his name mean?
It means the lamenter.
The lamenter. Okay, that does not sound like a glorious king. It sounds more like a guy who just realized things are already going wrong.
It sounds like a job title during a downturn, right?
Wow.
You have the finisher who builds the project, and then immediately after, the next administration is the lamenter. And as you go down the list, the names get more desperate. The last one, Ubertutu, his name implies protection.
He's the guy trying to hold the walls up while the roof is caving in.
Yes. And then the flood hits. And what happens to the numbers on the king list right after?
They crash. I'm looking at it now. The post-flood section, the rains drop to 1,200 years, then 900, and then pretty quickly they're down to normal human lifespans. 20, 30 years.
The divine administration exhausted itself. That 12,200 years is a document of them trying to manage a failing system. Once the flood hits, that administration is gone. The system reboots on human time.
Okay, so if the king list is the timeline of the crisis, what was the crisis itself? I mean, what was actually breaking? Because the common myth is that the gods sent the flood because humans were just too noisy.
Right, the noisy neighbor theory. It's the standard reading of the Atrahasis Epic. Enlil, the CEO god, can't sleep because of the uproar of mankind.
Which has always seemed so incredibly petty to me. You guys are loud, so I'm going to drown the planet.
It does seem petty. But let's look at the actual text again. The specific line is, the land bellowed like a bull.
Bellowed like a bull. That doesn't sound like a party next door.
No, that's a low-frequency roar. It's the language of seismic instability. The expert view we're looking at today suggests this wasn't acoustic noise from people talking. It was the roar of environmental collapse. The Earth itself was becoming unstable.
And we have actual physical evidence for this, right? At Eridu, the first city.
Eridu is the smoking gun. Archaeologists have dug up 19 layers of temples there, all built on the same spot, all for the god Enki. It starts with Temple 19. It's small, it's organized. As you go up through time, the temples get massive.
Yeah, they had huge residential quarters.
Meaning the god or the administration was literally living there. It was a fully staffed facility.
Okay.
But then, around Temple 7, the architecture shifts. It gets chaotic. The walls are thin, repairs look hasty. It looks experimental, like they're frantically remodeling to adapt to something. And crucially, in the final layers, the residential quarters, the kitchens, the bedrooms, they vanish. They're gone.
Wait, hold on. If the temple is the god's house and you take out the bedroom, where does the god go?
That's the million-dollar question. The archaeology suggests the facility was downgraded. It went from a staffed residence to just a ritual shell.
They moved out.
They evacuated. And the geology tells us why. Eridu is on the edge of the marshes. We have core samples showing the groundwater was rising and rising aggressively during this period.
But rising water doesn't seem like enough to abandon a whole city. People build levees. They adapt.
It is if you rely on irrigated agriculture. In Mesopotamia, the soil is full of salt. As long as the water table is deep, you're fine. But when that groundwater rises, it pushes the salt up to the surface. It's called salinization.
Oh, I see. So the fields just turn white.
And wheat can't grow in salty soil. This is a great irony. Enki is the god of the Abzu, the deep, sweet water under the earth. But his own domain, the Abzu, it began to rise. The sweet water turned into poison.
So his own foundation was revolting against him.
Yes. So when Enlil complains about the noise, he's probably talking about the groaning of fault lines and the systemic agricultural collapse that followed. No amount of administration could fix salinized soil.
That reframes the whole conflict. It wasn't Enlil versus noisy humans. It was the administration versus a planet that is breaking.
And that leads us to the decision. If you can't fix the building and the foundation is rotting, what do?
You evacuate.
You evacuate.
Which brings us to the protocol of withdrawal.
Yeah.
Because the texts imply this wasn't a chaotic rout. It wasn't people running for helicopters at the last second. This was a cold, calculated shutdown.
We have records of the Divine Assembly meetings, and these weren't unanimous votes. It was a heated debate between Enlil, the executive branch,
And let's cut our losses and shut it down, guy.
and Enki, who represents technical operations.
Yeah.
He's the guy saying, wait, we have assets down there. We have a workforce. We can't just scrap the entire project.
But the consensus went against him.
It did. The assembly voted for a shutdown, and we see the execution of this vote in the city lament texts.
I love these texts because they are just so bureaucratic in their sadness.
They're deeply tragic, but highly procedural. Texts like the Lament for describe a specific sequence. It's like a checklist. First, the local deity pleads with the assembly to stay. please don't make me leave my city.
But the assembly refuses.
The decision is binding, so the deity performs a formal departure ceremony. They pack up their attributes, their divine powers, they seal the chamber, and they leave. And only then does the storm or the destruction come.
That is the key insight right there. They didn't flee because the storm hit. They left before it hit.
It was a strategic retreat. They knew the collapse was imminent, probably because they had the data from those 241,000 years of monitoring, and they chose to withdraw their personnel and seal the archives before the terminal event.
Staying was not survivable. So the execs have left the building. The system is set to crash. But there's a rogue element.
Enki,
the technical director. He realizes that total abandonment means the permanent loss of all the data, the genetic stock, everything they build.
but he can't openly defy the assembly. He took an oath of silence about the shutdown order.
So he pulls the ultimate lawyer move.
The reed wall loophole is one of my favorite moments in all of ancient literature. He goes to the house of Zusudra, who is the Sumerian Noah, and he doesn't speak to the man. He speaks to the wall of the house.
Well, listen to me. Wall, tear down the house and build a boat.
He knows Zusudra is on the other side listening. It's plausible deniability. I didn't tell the human. I was just talking to the architecture. If the human happened to eavesdrop, well, that's on him.
It's pure bureaucratic sabotage. But it saves the project. And this leads us to the Instructions of Shuruppak.
Right. Now, this text is usually just called wisdom literature. People read it like it's a collection of proverbs, be nice to your mom, work hard.
But in the context of a looming collapse, you're saying we should read it differently.
We need to read it as a disaster preparedness manual, an OPSE guide. The text itself claims to be from the son of Ubartutu, remember him, the last king on the list, and it's handed down to Zusudra, the flood survivor. It's the handover document.
Okay, give me an example. How does the advice change when you read it as survival mode?
Okay, take the line, don't locate a field on a road.
Which sounds like simple farming advice. Dust, trampling, whatever.
But in a collapse scenario, a road is a vector. It's where armies come from. It's where refugees come from. It's where looters come from. If you're trying to survive a breakdown of law and order, the last thing you want is your food source visible from the highway.
That makes a terrifying amount of sense.
Yeah.
What about this one? Don't buy a donkey that brays.
Exactly. Why would you care if a donkey brays?
Because it's annoying.
Because noise discipline saves lives. If you are hiding your resources during a famine or your family during a war, a loud animal gives away your position. It's tactical. It's the same logic as don't vouch for others. That's not being mean. That's limiting your social liability when the legal system is gone.
It's basically a prepper manual from 4,000 years ago.
It's civilizational survivalism. And then finally, you have the boat itself.
Right. In the Gilgamesh tablet, Enki gives the specs. And it's not shaped like a boat. It doesn't have a bow or a stern.
No, it's a cube. The length, width, and height are all equal. And it's sealed with bitumen, inside and out.
A sealed cube. That's not for sailing somewhere. That's for bobbing in a washing machine.
It's a life support capsule, a biosphere. And the text says explicitly it's modeled after the Abzu. It's a watertight, self-contained system designed to float out the catastrophe.
And who gets on this boat? In the Bible, it's Noah and his family. Who does Zusudra bring?
Enki instructs him to bring the craftsman. He brings the tech support. And he brings the seed of all living things. He prioritized the preservation of technical skill and biological data. He wasn't saving souls. He was saving the source code.
So putting it all together, we have a timeline of, 240,000 years of crisis management in those administrative cycles. We have environmental data showing the foundation was rotting. We have a bureaucratic record of a vote to pull the plug. And we have one administrator, Enki, leaking the survival protocol to a select group of technicians to ensure the system could reboot.
That is the narrative the tablets give us if we strip away the religious gloss. It's a story of institutional failure and the desperate measures taken to preserve continuity.
It's almost haunting. You look back at that tablet in the museum CBS 10673 with that single word, key, departure. They knew they were leaving.
And they knew they weren't coming back. The texts never describe a return to that golden age. The post-flood world is harder. The lifespans are shorter. The gods are distant. We're living in the Plan B scenario.
We are the descendants of the leak.
We are. Civilization rebuilt because Enki left the instructions behind. We are using the math, the agriculture, the writing systems that were packed into that cube, metaphorically or literally.
It really makes you look at those museum exhibits differently. They aren't just art. They're the black box recorder of a crash.
And that raises the most provocative question of all.
What's that?
If they left because the cosmic hierarchy or the environmental boundaries were failing, if the system was fundamentally broken, was it ever fixed?
Oof, that hits hard.
Think about it. The administrators left. The Anunnaki withdrew to their distant dwellings. We're still here. So, are we living in a repaired world? Or are we just scavenging in the ruins of their abandoned project, managing the exact same instability that drove them away in the first place?
That is a terrifying thought. The idea that we were basically just squatting in a condemned building.
The tablets say the noise returned after the flood, the population grew again, the issues weren't solved, they were just managed differently. The parameters haven't changed.
Well, on that existential note, okay, let's unpack this later over a very strong drink. We've gone from a single clay shipping manifest to a full-blown theory of cosmic abandonment. I want to thank you for guiding us through the archives today.
It's always a pleasure to dust off the tablets.
And to you listening, next time you hear a donkey bray, maybe keep it down. You never know who's listening. But thanks for joining us on this deep dive.